First off, I just want to introduce myself. I am Ashley Rivera Mercado. I'm the founder and president of Mujeres in Marketing. We are a 501c3 nonprofit for Latinas in the marketing and communications and creative industries. So I'm just here joining to share a little bit about building a personal brand. In this session, Rooted and Recognizable, building a personal brand that reflects your culture, community, and career vision. So thank you so much for joining, and let's just get started. So, your personal brand is more than just your career feed. I feel like there is a huge misconception about what a personal brand is. What does it mean to have one? For someone who is not a huge fan of, the term personal brand overall, I think it's really important to be mindful of like a brand is how something, a product, a company, something shows up in the world, but a personal brand is how you're showing up in that space or in the places that you choose to make yourself visible. So it's really more tailored to how you show up, the things that you're standing for, and then how you are creating or cultivating a space that is rooted in sharing that with others, sharing yourself, and then sharing resources between one another. So it isn't really about polishing, having a perfect feed. It's about having clarity in all of those things. So a little bit about me. I am a brand strategist. I'm a community builder. I'm the founder of Mujeres in Marketing, but I've also worked at some pretty big brands, pretty big companies. And it really just kind of serves that your brand can really lend itself to sharing and growing you in these different spaces. So as someone who spent a lot of time in higher education, I worked at the University of Central Florida here in Orlando for about 6 years in different roles, but mostly in admissions. And then during that time, I really learned a lot about what my morals were, what my values were, especially during the pandemic, which is when I actually officially pivoted over into marketing at Loose Media. I was an editorial contributor and social media manager for them. And then that allowed and opened doors really for me to join Anthology, which is an ed tech company. From there, I switched over to Luminar, which is a full tech startup. And then I also worked at KPMG doing social media for their talent, brand, and marketing team. So I will say, I do believe a lot of these career pivots and changes were only possible because of the personal brand that I built myself. So I went to the University of Central Florida. That is where I got my bachelor's in international and global studies with a minor in intelligence and national security. But last year, I also graduated with my MBA. So all of these career pivots that I just described were only possible through my personal brand. They were only possible with how I was showing up online, the things I was making, the portfolios I was cultivating, and everything else in between. So that is why I always tell people it is incredibly important to invest in your personal brand and just be able to utilize those experiences and show up through social media and tell your story in different ways. So across all of these different roles, though, one thing truly stayed the same is that I always led with culture, clarity, and community in mind. So with that, let's talk a little bit about culture. I think a lot of us are super aware of the importance of culture, especially as we navigate professional spaces and just how we develop as professionals. But with that, we're often told to tone down our culture to fit in. But the truth is, culture is the root of resonance. So it's the stories, traditions, and perspectives that make us unforgettable. So a lot of the times, culture is going to help build trust faster than any kind of like wordsmithing you can do, as well as representation. Just because when you're showing up authentically, you're kind of creating that space where other people feel like they can also be themselves. And that is really what enables some of your strongest networking, some of those connections. Like we're often told to network, right? But what does that really mean? And really what that is about showing up as yourself, creating that space, making sure that everyone's comfortable. And then of course, like leaning into your identity. So in a world where like we are often told that our identity is so important in cultivating and creating cultures and in creating connection, it really isn't a liability to show up as yourself as long as you know yourself and you're able to utilize that to help others feel seen and understood. So that way your needs are more clearly communicated and you can help understand and connect with each other more effectively. So when you lead with culture, you're not just building a brand, you're actually building belonging. So culture is not a trend, it's actually your truth. So, these are two pictures from Mujeres in Marketing, our launch party, and I think it was a huge success personally as a new nonprofit. Just because we had over 100 people show up, and especially based out of Orlando, Florida, that's not really your traditional market that you're going to find a lot of people like specifically employed in marketing, or that where this may have a bigger success rate, right? But it really is your truth. As long as you are consistently bringing your culture into spaces, you will be able to meet your people and cultivate those spaces that will benefit you professionally, that will create and enable those connections that you're looking for. Because when you lean into your culture, you're showing up more authentically as yourself. And then you're also attracting those really aligned people that will be able to meet your needs more effectively. So I know a lot of people may have like a stay and spray method where they're focused on going to networking events and meeting as many people as possible. But in reality, it's much more effective to go to an event and create like 2 to 3 really strong connections versus 10 to 15 like superficial connections that you won't even really be able to remember anything distinct about them or cultivate those effective connections to get the things that you want. So, what are the 3 roots of a brand? Every brand has roots, and roots meaning the unseen foundation that helps that brand grow. So, for us, those roots are clarity, confidence, and consistency. So, what does that framework look like? When you are showing up with clarity, that means knowing who you are and what you stand for. As long as you are able to effectively show up as yourself, you're clearly defined in what you want to do. For example, I was able to career pivot effectively because I knew that I wanted to work in technology and I wanted to be a marketer. Those are the 2 things I wanted to do. Therefore, with that clarity, it helped me be more confident about how I was showing up in spaces where I wanted to be more of a tech marketer. So what did I do? I would go to events. I would talk a lot about my background. I would network with other people and be very transparent about wanting to be in the tech field or wanting to be a marketer. And then in being confident, because I had that clarity, I also had that consistency. So all these are intertwined, but your consistency is, and I think this is where sometimes if you don't have like really great mentorship or you don't have like a lot of guidance, we can lose ourselves because we're often told to like network and get whatever you need to get. And sometimes it may compromise the way that you're showing up in person versus online, right? You want to show up the same way online that you show up in person and within your community, because any disconnect between consistency will often make people lose faith in you. They will trust you less because they'll be like, oh, you said that you're really dedicated to like doing this. But then when you posted about that online, I feel like that didn't really match some of the stuff you were saying in person. And that to me shows kind of a lack of not necessarily integrity, but it does show a lack of consistency. So as long as you're able to kind of like not even just train yourself, but make it your new normal to always know who you are and what you stand for, being able to show up with that confidence that you need, and then always be consistent in that approach, you will do an excellent, excellent job of being able to create a brand that is recognizable, that is consistent, that is something that someone trusts, because you're the real deal at that point. You're practicing what you preach and you're bringing it to the right spaces and the right people. So, crafting your narrative. So people don't remember titles, they remember stories. I know a lot of the times, like, especially as like first generation or like people like myself that I grew up low income, when I first started entering these professional spaces, it was really challenging for me. I think I was really impressed by titles and I thought titles had a lot of weight. But I think the more time you spend in corporate America, the more you realize that titles are really just for functional knowledge of understanding what you do or for understanding how much you should get paid for a specific role. Once you're able to kind of meet people where they're at, learn more about them and their stories, that's more the stuff that people will remember about you. When I go to networking events, like sometimes I'll remember like someone's title if they're part of a panel or something. But if you come up to me and say, I'm a VP at this thing, I'm not really going to remember that. But I will remember if you're bringing up, a personal anecdote, or you're bringing up something that people like, or something that I connect with, right? If you're bringing up like, oh, I visited Puerto Rico because I'm Puerto Rican, I'm going to remember that about you. Like, oh, they went to Puerto Rico and they went for this, because those are the things that help me view you as a person versus just a title. So again, that is connected all to your brand narrative. And it's all about how you're connecting your culture, community, and your career vision to how you're showing up online. So next, we are going to do an interactive prompt. So you can share it in the chat. You could just share it for yourself. You could share it with your family, whatever you want to do. But write one sentence that starts with "I am," and craft your narrative. Craft your like vision statement for yourself, or who you are, what you value, who you serve. For example, mine would be, I am Ashley Rivera Mercado. I value advocating for Latinas and allies in the marketing and creative industries. And that's also who I serve. Like once I'm able to kind of define those three things, it's so much easier to never lose sight of the vision and the goals that I have for myself. So one thing I really do encourage you, if you are in this session, just make sure that you are always operating with this "I am" statement, and repeat it to yourself, because that way, when you do go out, when you do go to events, or when you go to talk to other people or connect with others, you are very clearly defined, right? It goes back to that clarity, consistency, confidence. As long as you have this ready and you're like, I'm going to go to this event, but like, before I go, let me think about that prompt that I put together. Is this in line with who I am, who I value, who I serve? Yes, that event is worthy of your time, or those meetings are worthy of your time and your effort and your energy, because those are really our most valuable takeaways from as we navigate professional spaces, or as we look to upskill, is you do have to become more mindful of where you are putting your time and energy, and staying aligned in that vision. So I think, and yes, to Esperanza's point, it helps to stay grounded. I think a lot of people are very surprised, and like, how often I am able to clearly define my goals, because I know that these are the things that I am aligned in. So it is very easy for me to not lose sight. I don't really do the whole not seeing the forest for the trees thing, because I'm in the forest. I'm with the trees. So in staying grounded, it makes it that much easier just to continue serving my community most effectively in ways that benefit them, and not getting lost in like bigger like target areas that I'm not actually able to serve effectively because I'm losing focus. So make sure you're crafting the statement, make sure that it's really rooted in who you are, and that will set you up to succeed. So your tools for growing your presence. So content. I always get asked, as a social media person, what are some of these tools you do? And this goes back to staying grounded, right? You definitely want to grow your presence. You want to be able to reach more people. You want to become more visible. And all those things are excellent, especially as you're building a personal brand. Because at the same time, like, why would you build a brand and then not be able to meet people where they're at, or not being able to get the reach or become visible to the people that like you? So what I really recommend is, don't get caught up in chasing algorithms, because the real growth happens when you keep your voice intact while expanding your presence. So I really like these 4 kind of channels for continuing to grow your presence and doing it authentically while building trust with your audience. If you chase trends, people know you're looking for a quick grab of followers or engagement. If people know, like, when you're posting just a post versus when you're posting something that you're actually very aligned with. So these key tools: LinkedIn for thought leadership and visibility, Instagram for storytelling and community building, newsletters and blogs for depth and authority. So kind of like fostering more of that thought leadership, bilingual and multicultural content to meet people where they're at. So, as Latinos, we know that we all have like common languages or cultures that we're always keeping in mind as we interact with each other, which really makes spaces like even this one at Techqueria so important to our community. But it is very important to create content that's also able to meet your community with where they're at. So what that includes is a little bit of an inclusive lens when it comes to language, and just all these different channels all have different members of your audience, and you are helping to meet them where they're at more effectively. So a strong digital presence, it's really not about being everywhere. It's just about being authentic in the spaces that you do choose to show up. So as you navigate these different channels, make sure that you are showing up authentically and that you are really working to cultivate a higher quality community with people that really resonate with the messaging that you're providing them with. So, one thing I get asked a lot as a social media professional or marketing professional is like, how can you make us go viral? And one thing that I always tell people is that followers fades, but your community lasts. So, your social proof isn't actually rooted in your external perception or your blue check marks or your verified status. It's about people who believe in you because they've seen your values in action. So the key points around this is make sure that you're celebrating your shared wins. Are you collaborating with people? Are you did you get help on a project from a colleague? Did you like an agency like mine? We tend to partner with other agencies on project work. So you want to be very transparent in showing people, hey, like I partnered with this agency on this phenomenal project, assuming you're not under NDA. And just make sure that like you're also including people in winning, because it oftentimes I find it is so rare that anyone actually made it on their own. A lot of the time it truly does take a village, and that translates professionally just as much as personally. So it is very important to lift others as you rise, because your credibility also grows through your ability to collaborate with other thought leaders in your space or other recognized professionals in your space. And one thing I tell people all the time is like Mujeres in Marketing is a great example of that. This was just a small idea that I came up with, as a Latina marketer that was new to the industry. I was like, wow, I see a lot of other Latina marketers, but I don't really see us super well represented across the industry, but I know we're there. And then on top of that, like, where is a space where I can meet other Latina marketers just to talk about marketing, not tied to an industry, not tied through titles or compensation. And that is really what made us so accessible as far as a national network and a community, is that we were very aware from the beginning that the ones that need us will really need us. So how are we showing up? How are we connecting with the members of our community? And that was really always the core of our strategy. So as you learn to navigate your personal brand, like your cheerleaders, your greatest fans will be people who have seen your quality of work and they believe in you as a person, because they know that you are the most capable of getting things done, especially in that space. So as you continue to build and grow, just make sure that you are continuing to operate with the mindset that, yes, while it's great to have a lot of followers, like, who are you actively connecting with? Who are the people that you are, really just like continuing to grow and learn from in these spaces? Sorry, change slides. So then moving on. So your brand can create change. So your brand isn't just a personal asset, it's a tool for transformation. So when it's rooted in your identity, it can shift narratives in industries and open doors for others. So, what are some examples of how you can use your brand for impact? I think a lot of us are very curious about why even build a personal brand. Like, what is the point of building a brand? What is the point of continuing to like do this work and posting online for free and all these things? And it's really like, as long as like I've been posting online, I really try to use my brand to be an advocate for equity. So because that is at the core, and it goes back to the I am statement, what are you using your brand for? My brand is rooted in who I am, what I value, and my community. Therefore, I use mine to advocate for equity. You can also use it to share your platform with underrepresented voices. You can also use it, for example, if you are in a position of power or you are in a position of influence, align your work with causes you believe in. Teach others how to join your field if it is a field that you don't see a high level of representation of people like you in, because there's so much opportunity in just opening those doors that will really enable you to have that much more of a bigger community to engage with, as well as just maximizing the reach. Because as you know, your advocates will be people that will speak. Oh, sorry, I just got a Q&A thing. So that was confusing. But so really it's just more about aligning your current role and your current resources with your brand, and then using that to use it for impact, because impact is really how you measure the success of your brand. You see how it's influencing others, you see how they are able to grow and learn or get tools or see you as a thought leader in that space. So impact is how you should be measuring your success versus followers or engagement counts or anything like that, because impact is really what moves the needle at the end of the day. That's what translates into dollars. That's what translates into community building. That's what really translates into life-changing work that helps you meet your goals as you continue to grow your brand. So another prompt, like think of one value from your culture or your community. Write it down. You can share it in the chat. You could just share it to yourself. And then ask yourself, how can this value show up in my brand? Because your brand is so important to everything. But think of these values and think of how you are utilizing them as an instrument to build your brand. These are really important questions that you're just going to have to sit with, but it's always good to have them in mind as you continue to talk and just engage with others in this space, because as you share values with other people, you will find people creating similar content or engaging themselves in causes that are very aligned with the things that you're probably seeking to achieve as well. And that's where you get some of your best collaborators. So when your values lead, your brand never feels like a mask. I think a lot of the times I'm meeting other professionals that do feel the pressure of showing up as someone that they are objectively not. And in that, it can be very challenging because you do want, if you are not the best version of yourself or you are not where you want to be professionally, it can feel very challenging to show up online. It can be a challenge to present online because you're not even sure really where your goals are or where you're taking it. But as long as you are leading with your values and you are implementing that in your brand, you're never really having to compromise yourself. And it really isn't as tiring to show up as that person because you are consistently being that person and being true to yourself. So, what you should be walking away from this session is a framework to define your brand with authenticity. That goes back to the clarity, consistency, and confidence framework. The tools to grow credibility through storytelling, content, and community. So that's going back to kind of those channel descriptions and the different ways that you can be leveraging them to continue growing your personal brand. And then, of course, permission to lead with your identity. I think some of the biggest things that we compromise is our identity in this process. And that's just a different way to assimilate that doesn't really attract people to engaging with you, because that way you're just like everyone else. A lot of the times, the value adds that we are looking for in others actually exist within ourselves, but it is very rooted in our individual identities, not so much as appearing like everyone else. So you don't have to fit the mold to make an impact. You just have to show up rooted and ready to receive all of the great things coming your way, as long as you're showing up as yourself. So, oh, same thing. And then the world just really doesn't need another polished brand. It does need your voice, your story, and your roots. So I did leave a ton of time for Q&A. If you found this session useful, please feel free to visit Mujeres in Marketing, visit us on our website. If you want to stay in touch with me, add me on LinkedIn. But if anyone has questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or use the Q&A function, just because I will be hanging out for a few more minutes and because we have a ton of time before the next session. So I'm just hanging out here, guys. Let me know. Hi, Adrienne, and thank you. Um, how did I conquer? So, Adrienne asked in the chat, how did you conquer imposter syndrome that so many Latinos face? So, I think it's really interesting when people mention imposter syndrome because I will say, one, therapy always helps. Mental health help is something that I think a lot of people would benefit from. So, if you are in a position where it is affordable and accessible to you, I highly, highly recommend going to therapy or just like finding a community that you feel safe expressing yourself in, because that really helps itself. But honestly, my imposter syndrome was very healed when I went to work at a tech startup and engaged with senior leadership. So, a lot of my role was engaging directly with the C suite at that startup and doing executive messaging, as far as like all hands and, all the internal newsletters and social media and stuff. And then once I got access to that level of leadership, I realized they were not any more organized or sophisticated or matured than anyone my age or my level. I think there's just people with different skill sets. They've worked longer and they've had an ability to elevate their careers, obviously, because they've been in it longer. But in reality, the imposter syndrome was so cured when I realized that even my bosses were not super well equipped with all the answers. And that made it easier for me to realize that while I do focus a lot on upskilling or bettering a lot of the things about myself, to always show up and produce my best work, no one's ever really like a finished product. And I think once it's easy to kind of see that, everyone gives each other more grace. So that kind of helped me as far as imposter syndrome goes, because I went from saying, like, I'm not qualified to do that to saying, oh, like I can learn anything in this world. And really, that's about embracing change, embracing challenges, taking feedback effectively, and then just also being able to be comfortable with like not always being correct, and then exercising accountability. Like, oh, I was wrong, or like, oh, I don't know how to do that. Like, but do you know someone that does? And that really does. And especially once you receive the support through your community or through your advocates, you realize that there's a lot more people like that than there are people that actually do have it all figured out. So, I got another question from the Q&A. So, from your experience, besides content, how much impact can a personal visual identity have in someone's personal brand? So, I'm not sure what you mean by personal visual identity. I assume what you mean is like a more aesthetic way to kind of present yourself versus like just focusing on like text first or articles or things like that. So, one thing I would say, personal visual identity has a lot to do with it. People are very visual creatures. And I say that as someone who is like very, like, I really like visually appealing things. I love me a good a Pinterest board. I love me a great like aesthetic moment. I do think it's a big impact, but I also think when you are picking your personal visual identity, again, it kind of goes back to like, how are you showing up in your community? How are you like telling your stories? Because, for example, if I go to volunteer at a food bank, I personally, and this is something I've seen other people do, and if you've done this, this is not a criticism, but sometimes people take pictures or like post things of the people they are helping. Like if you are at a food bank giving food to homeless people or low income people, like don't post a picture of the people you're helping, post a picture of the team that helped. You know what I mean? Because that's something very simple where like you're not using the intended community as like a way to gather likes, but you're giving them a lot of dignity and not outing them as a community in need, and you're centering yourself and the team that helped help that community. So it's kind of just exercising a little bit of like sensitivity with how you show up and share things on the internet. And I think that has a lot of impact, even though people may not think that way. A lot of people may not think there's an issue posting someone that you helped, but for me, I would look at that and be like, I think I would have given that person a little more dignity and maybe not posted them unless it's like telling their story or something like that. So I will say, as far as that question goes, visual identity has a lot to do with it just because it impacts perception. And those are just things to keep in mind, and best practices, guardrails, all those things as you continue developing your story. So Esperanza asked, how can I embody my culture in the pearl jewelry space like Carolina Herrera? I want to create a personal jewelry brand that reflects my authentic self. So I think first you have to decide like why pearls? On a basic level, why the niche industry that you're in? Why is Carolina Herrera your inspiration? Like, what are they doing that makes you want to be like them? And pull those kind of aspects and find how it can connect to your brand. Like, that's really what it is. It's like, what do you like about this thing? Why do you like it so much? And then what are you trying to do to embody it through your brand without losing yourself in the process? Because as much as people say imitation is a best form of flattery, it's really not. Inspiration is. So I always tell people inspiration is the best form of flattery because it shows that they got the values and elements of a brand without you fully copying it. Because I know fully, like, there have been instances where projects and things that I've worked on have gotten copied or have been stolen, and it didn't feel good to see my stuff get stolen because I worked incredibly hard on it. So it's very like, you should be looking at brands that inspire you, and you should be looking at why they inspire you and what kind of brand you're trying to build that will emulate similar vibes without compromising the identity. Because if you are creating something like jewelry, there's story behind jewelry. Like, I come from a family where, like, I have some pieces that were given to me by my mom that were my grandmother's. So, like, probably if I were to show a jewelry piece that came from my grandmother, I would probably post a picture of her wearing it or recreate a picture of her wearing it with that vibe to kind of give that cultural heritage and give the inspiration that makes me want to wear it in the same way or produce pieces like that for other people. So that's kind of how I would probably formulate it. And then, of course, like, how you can show these things. Also, pick aesthetics that you like. Like, is it something that you would buy from? Is it something that inspires you? Because if you are the center of your brand, you are going to guide that identity and that story. So I love the questions coming in. I will continue to hang out if anyone has any more questions. But yeah, otherwise, we're just yapping and hanging out. And thank you all for being here today. So Valeria just asked in the chat, what do you think about sharing content in Spanish and English in the same account? Can this confuse the audience, or should I post little text for translating in both languages? So this is a really common question. I think a lot of marketers are asking themselves. And one thing to keep in mind is, who is your audience? Like, who is your target demographic on a very granular level? Are you posting to people that need the translation? So, and I ask that not because there isn't value in posting things in English and Spanish. I think there's a lot of value in providing multilingual content to people, especially with, well, historically, the influx of immigrants this country has had, and especially given that a lot of immigrants are single language, at least for their initial first years upon immigrating. I love inclusive content. I love when people translate it, because sometimes there's words that don't translate English to Spanish well. So my agency does specialize in English and Spanish content creation, because we do operate within the United States and Puerto Rico. So I will say there is an argument that you can do, to Esperanza's point, you can do Spanglish, which is great. But again, like, you should be A/B testing your posts. Like, and I say that is, you can do a post in English and then repost it in Spanish and see which one performed better. But you have to space them out long enough to kind of see that it's not super repetitive, or you have to rework it a little bit. Whether it's like, you can produce the imagery in English and then produce a caption in Spanish, or vice versa, and A/B test that. So test it one way and then test it a second way and then compare the outcomes. So you have to do that in your content plan a little bit until you can actually get results of, is it worth actually translating? Because there is there is an argument for transcreation versus translation, which is producing and translating information from English to Spanish or Spanish to English or whatever language in the tone and using the words that it originally came from. So for example, like when you say like you like something in English, you'll be like, "Oh, that was really good." But like in Puerto Rico, we would say "Eso está brutal." And that's not, you could say like, "Oh, estaba muy bueno," but like that doesn't give the same emotional context as saying like, "Oh, eso estaba brutal," which is like, I really, really liked that. So it's kind of like you have to be able to transcreate, and it could be your tone. Maybe you're translating too literally and you're not transcreating the content. But I think it's like it's worth A/B testing if you are not sure which language you want to be the primary, because even if you're producing the information in English and Spanish, there's always kind of like a dominant language. From what I've seen, like there's graphics where like most of it's in the bigger font, or the central focal point of the image is English, and then in the bottom it's in Spanish. So as you do your captions, as you A/B test, I would just look at those things, and then if you are going to include both on the same post, I would recommend doing like one full language first and then a break, like if it's your captions, and then doing one full language after. Because I find when people try to like literally translate and they do English, Spanish, it's very confusing, because you're reading the same thing twice in both languages. But Spanglish is also a good middle. It's also very important to keep in mind that the next generation of Latino consumers within the US, a lot of them do not speak Spanish fluently. So a lot of them are looking more for those cultural connections in your content. And that's where Spanglish could be a really beautiful middle, depending on who you're targeting from an audience perspective. Just because they're not so much tied directly to the language, to them it's the culture. So implementing all those things. And I hope that was helpful for you. So Adrian just asked, what's one hurdle in marketing that was different for you to get past? It could be a skill, environment, etc. So I will say, as someone who's like a little bit of a non-traditional marketer, like my degree was political science, and I had no intentions on being a marketer even 5 years ago. That because that's really when I started. The hurdle I think was the difference in um, producing with like an outcome in mind. I think that was something. I think a lot of people are not aware of how data driven marketing actually is, because I always tell people good marketers will be very respectful of your time and energy and efforts, especially as a business. If you're working with small businesses, like you really want to understand your clients' needs and what their outcomes, like what their desired outcomes are, so you can effectively meet those needs. So I think that hurdle was kind of difficult, like understanding truly how data driven the industry is. So you are always very focused on return on investment, being very mindful of how you spend campaign dollars and how you're investing in your clients' goals and needs. So that hurdle, I think, was pretty hard. Also, working on distributed teams, like fully remote creative teams, was kind of challenging. Like, unless you're working with very organized people and you have a project management tool that everyone on your team buys into, it can be incredibly hard to be productive in that environment. So I think, understanding like truly how collaborative marketing is and then how data driven it is, like those were things that I was not super used to, especially coming from higher ed, where a lot of the times you own one step in a product, in a program or project, where marketing you can own many steps. So that was kind of just the biggest hurdle I probably faced. Thank you. All right. Well, thanks, friends. I'm going to go ahead and give us a short break. But if you're super interested in connecting with me, feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn, connect on socials, follow Mujeres in Marketing, visit us on our website, join our online community, Preparadas, so you can meet other Latina creatives, and any allies. We're super ally friendly. So share with your friends, tell everyone you know, and thanks for having me.